Welcome back to Wake Up with Nubian Tigers Talk, a podcast brought to you by a group of Black Princetonians where we talk about issues that impact our Black and Brown communities. My name is Michelle Jacobs, and I'm here as always with my co-host, Ray Smalls. So Ray, are you sweltering in this summer heat like we are down here?
I am sweltering, sweating. What other words begin with the letters SW?
I'm telling you, we're going to have to do an episode on climate change eventually.
Yes, yeah, and especially climate change in our communities.
Right, exactly, because it's just so frightening and interesting to watch as it develops, and let's hope we can survive long enough to do an episode. Well, hopefully our listeners are someplace cool and comfortable today, because we're going to be talking to a fabulous individual who's going to be talking about how people can help themselves improve their communities. So we're very fortunate to have with us today Dr. Rahsaan Harris. Dr. Harris has more than 20 years of experience leading nonprofits and international grant making, partnering with communities to make local investments and promote community improvement. He is a transformative leader and role model who has been a New York City public school teacher, board member of various Harlem-based organizations, devoted Big Brothers Big Sister mentor, and Peace Corps environmental educational volunteer in South America.
Wow, man.
Yeah, he's doing a lot. He received his doctorate in public and urban policy from the New School, where his dissertation was on understanding how socioeconomic diversity in the African American community affects their philanthropic interests. He also holds 2 masters, one in management from New York University and one high school science education from Columbia University. And of course, he has his Bachelor of Arts from Princeton University, where he was a member of the class of 1995. Dr. Harris is currently the CEO of Citizens Committee for New York. And we're very happy and privileged to have him with us today. So welcome to the show, Dr. Harris.
It is an honor to be able to speak with you. Thank you.
All right, so on your website, we're looking at the Citizens Committee for New York City. Can you tell us a little bit about what was going on when it was created in 1975? What's some of the background on why it was started and the kind of work the committee does?
Citizens Committee for New York City believes in the power of people to make change. And during 1975, New York City was in a major financial crisis. Services weren't steady. Folks were concerned about crime. Folks were concerned about their well-being. There was a little bit of a pall over the city. And the founders of Citizens Committee came together and said, if we just roll up our sleeves and work together, we can be the solution for our city. So Osborne Elliott, who at the time was editor-in-chief of Newsweek magazine, Marietta Tree, who is an Upper East Side socialite, folks like Jacob Javits, the senator, who has the Jacob Javits Center. If you come to New York City, you go to lots of conferences there. Them and their friends became the genesis of Citizens Committee for New York City. And they famously put an ad in the New York Times where they asked for quote unquote greedy New Yorkers that are willing to step up and volunteer and make a difference for their city. So they were playing on the stereotype of New York City folks being selfish and greedy and mean. But I'm saying that, we can roll up our sleeves and we can be a part of the solution. And that is the legacy of our organization, of volunteerism and folks coming together. So as the organization developed, they catalyzed people coming together and that volunteerism through providing micro grants. So they asked people for what their wonderful ideas are. And they said, if you give us an idea of individuals coming together in their neighborhood, that we can give you $500, $2,000, $3,000 to help you get that project done. And for me, the power of that is it democratizes access to philanthropy. You don't have to be some person that's long experience in running nonprofit organizations and knowing how to talk to the major donors to be able to get your first gift. That's an opportunity to recognize average everyday people that are willing to come together, that identify a problem and identify a solution. And if you have that and share that with Citizens Committee and you're in one of the 5 boroughs, you can get our funding. And then hopefully you can be example to the rest of the city of how you can be part of the solution.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. You mentioned micro grants. So I know that your organization has different approaches to who gets to qualify for a grant. So can you explain just briefly how you select those organizations for grants, and how do you, many particularly community groups don't know the ins and outs of grant making and record keeping and all that. So how do you help them with that? And then finally, 3 questions into one. How do you decide what amounts of money will actually be helpful to the group in terms of moving them forward to accomplish their goals?
You ask fantastic questions, 3 parts, and I'll try to get to all of them. And I'll get to it by way of talking a little bit about my history. So I was fortunate enough to work at an international grant making foundation by the name of the Atlantic Philanthropies. Chuck Feeney, who was a businessman who learned on his days of foreign service that, folks that travel have, commerce needs and want to buy things, and that international commerce and finding ways of getting things that are duty-free, tax-free can actually be a business model. He started Duty Free Shoppers with some others, and that led to him becoming a billionaire when they sold Duty Free Shoppers. And he started a foundation that, when I was there, had an endowment of $4 billion. And we were doing strategic grant making that was international in at least 7 countries. And we had these large theories of change and strategic plans, and the investments that we were making in some cases were $100,000 wasn't even a lot, big grant for them. I meant to say, $20 million grants, and we're giving 400 million away annually across different grant making programs. I personally, when I was working there, had a grant making portfolio in Bermuda that was $2 million, just myself to give out. And I would only give out annually 6 grants with that $2 million. So those are larger grants. A micro grant comparatively is one that is as small as $500, maybe. A large grant for Citizens Committee is $10,000. And it is an amount of money that I will personally say, in my personal opinion, is not life-changing. $500 is not going to change somebody's life. But what I also learned while I was at the Atlantic Philanthropies, $4 billion in an endowment, if you just took that and spent that for the Department of Education in New York City, or the state of New Jersey Education Department, how long would that $4 billion take to burn through it? You burn through it really quickly. So change comes from philanthropy because philanthropy creates innovation. It proves concepts that are effective, and you can hopefully take that to scale to influence things that do matter and do leverage. And the 2 things that have leverage are when you influence policy, because policy that governments put in place and regulate, that moves billions or trillions of dollars within municipalities and in countries, or influencing culture. Because culture, when you influence it, what folks think, it is horrible to smoke, and how dare you smoke indoors, you make other people sick. That's changing culture. And when you change culture, you can change people's behavior. So philanthropy plays that are leveraged need to move policy, or they need to move the way people act. And people act when you create a different culture that hopefully promotes positivity. So within the context of Citizens Committee, our grants are hopefully micro grants, make people who are trying to positively influence culture and change behavior, or they're positively trying to make folks feel that they can be a part of civic engagement and influence policy. It gives them the courage, and it gives them the encouragement to do that work. So we select folks that, number one, raise their hand to try to make a difference. Number two, don't think that they themselves are the solution, but they're coming together and organizing with others. You have to be with more than one person to be able to get our grants. You don't have to be a 501c3, meaning you don't have to be recognized by the IRS as an official nonprofit organization. Just as long as you're doing something to improve your neighborhood and you're doing it with more than one person, then you can be eligible. Then the next level of scrutiny or criteria is to figure out clarity of the idea and activities, giving us a sense that you're able to execute it and actually make it happen. You don't have to have a PhD or have gone to Princeton or an Ivy League school, but just, do you know the people in the community to get this done? Can you motivate folks? Do you have the time? Is your plan feasible to make it happen? And then ultimately, the last thing is, how much money does it take to get it done? I'll just come up with a random example. You might have a block party that tries to get folks out into the streets, and you invite the police community to come over so that they are interacting in this positive space of music and sports and community, creating a safe space, trying to heal some of the wounds that might exist between police and community, and letting folks know that people own the streets and that, crime or bad behavior is not going to own it, because we're out here and we care about what's happening there. Now, to throw a party like that, you could do that party for $100 if all you need is flyers and get everyone to make it like a potluck, and you get someone to volunteer to be a DJ. Or you could do it for $3,000 if you do it on a different level. So it's really like understanding the plan of what someone has to do and what resources that we have, that we can spread them to have the most effect across multiple good actors that are stepping up to be leaders, and figuring out what is the bare minimum that we can give them at the very least that can make a difference. So in that example, that $100 to get the flyers, to get folks to come out, to bring out their potlucks and their own music, their own speakers, you can still have that party and it can happen. But if, for example, the project is giving people backpacks and they need a bare minimum of $1,000 to get the backpacks to the kids, if I give them $500, they're not going to be able to get those backpacks. So that doesn't meet the bare minimum. So that's how we make a decision.
That's really interesting, Rahsaan. And, following up on that, for our communities, for Black and Brown communities, let's say in particular in the New York City area, how do you market your citizens committee to them? I mean, how do they learn about what it is that you do? And then the second part of my question is, do you guys provide the kind of service where you can assist them with trying to put together their grant or their proposal for money for whatever their project is?
It is critically important, if you're trying to democratize access to civic engagement and democratize access to philanthropy, to make sure you're getting to communities that have historically been left behind by philanthropy and by powers that be, whether it's intentional or unintentional, because of the inertia of history, not necessarily being in favor of people of color based off of segregation and misogyny and homophobia and all of the different isms that are out there that stand in the way. So to your question, there has to be an intentional approach, and you go in and you need to figure out, where are the places that folks that live in communities that have been left behind or have the biggest disparities? How do they get their information? Who do they trust? And making sure that we go to those ambassadors. So one of the things that we do, we have a lot of partnerships with city council members, with state assembly people, state senators, and we do information sessions and try to use their constituency services to make sure to be outreach to folks that might be involved with them. We try to go to local community functions and leaders and make sure that we get into the newsletters that folks depend on and show up in spaces and have visibility. And then we try to make sure that our website, our social media, the way that we do outreach is multifaceted, that we don't reach people in one way, because one could argue, well, if you're on social media, then what about people caught in a digital divide? Well, one thing about that is a lot of urban folks and people of color over index and how they use technology, even if it's not the most, the highest speed broadband internet, like how folks use their smartphones and how they use text messages. It's just a matter of tailoring it. So we do text message campaigns, we do email blast. We try to make what we do on our website, on Instagram and on Facebook and on Twitter, and then also on LinkedIn, to be in all the different places where folks might be. And then lastly, I want to say that we also try to go to ethnic media when we can too, to make sure that we're in spaces where folks might be able to hear about us. And one quick story, we had this new neighborhood business program, and it was to support folks that were negatively impacted by the pandemic and folks that are innovating now to be able to be safe in a socially distant environment, and then also try to promote businesses that have an outsized social good beyond their business model. So they're not only trying to do well and thrive financially as a neighborhood business, which we defined as 10 employees or fewer, but also to do well by the community, because what they represent culturally or the services they provide or how they're engaging folks. And we ended up in the Southeast Asian newscast. And literally when it happened, we were getting new applications every 30 seconds. Boom, boom. We thought that we were hacked at some point or being spammed, but it was that ethnic outlet that community really wanted access to that kind of service. And literally the first year, we had 2,000 applications, which was a pretty big deal. Yeah, but after this happened, we got 12,000 applications by being in their conversation flow. So to your last part of your question, how do you make sure that if you're in these people's sites, that they can access you in a way that's not super technical, in a way that they can communicate to you with across language difference, across even educational difference? And what I've tried to do and the staff tries to do is break down the idea, explain the who, what, why, where, when, and how of your project. People can understand simple language like that. Tell me your theory of change or give me your business model sometimes can be very difficult for folks, but who is benefiting and who's doing the project? Why are you doing this project? Where, what geography is being, what neighborhood, because, this is all in New York City, which neighborhood is benefiting, how are you going to do it? So what are the activities? Breaking it down in language that folks can access. And so hopefully explaining it in ways that we can evaluate those ideas across those basic tenets, making the application not super long. And then lastly, putting together, because definitely in this pandemic, Zoom sessions and kind of office hours where we invite folks in and explain the application, have them talk to us and put them in breakout rooms to talk to each other so that they can begin to pitch and articulate what their ideas are, so that our hopefully not overly complex application is accessible to them, and then they've gotten practice of kind of what they're going to put in.
That's so fascinating. I know Ray's going to want to talk to you about the COVID thing, but before we switch over from the grant process, micro grants is something that has been used in the global South for quite a few years, particularly around the issue of women and getting into small businesses and such. And it's been fabulously successful in the global South, and yet we don't see a lot of it here in the US. So it's almost like people would think that's a too simplistic model to work in the US, but it seems like that's exactly what you guys have been doing and have been doing for a while. So how do you, so I get how you get the word out about to the communities you want to serve, but why isn't Citizens Committee more widely known for being a model for how to help communities help themselves?
Your question goes to the heart of why folks know about certain programs and initiatives versus others, what it takes to break through. And certain programs and initiatives don't break through because there's so much noise out there that it's hard to. Some don't break through because they intentionally are comfortable in the smaller spaces that they are and they reside, and they're not necessarily trying to break through.
Mm.
So, again, I hadn't said this, but my first day working at Citizens Committee was March 16th, 2020. So I am not long in this job. That definitely came with a lot of interesting COVID-related challenges that I guess we might talk about later. But in my short history here, I know that I wanted to make sure that we are accessible and known to as many folks that can benefit from this as possible. And then on the other side, really trying to be able to tout the impact that this kind of approach can have in regards to social change and making folks feel included. Why don't more people do micro grants? There are a few reasons. One, we've given out some years 400, 500 grants a year. It's just a lot of work talking to a lot of small individuals. So therefore, it's a capacity issue for some folks and really trying to organize yourself to be able to do that. But speaking frankly, when you give out a larger grant, you're giving it to folks that you have a relationship with, that has social capital, and it mitigates risk. So when you're giving smaller grants, what you're doing is you're really giving your faith into folks that you trust them. And it's more trust-based philanthropy. Yes, you vet folks, and yes, you want to do all those things. You don't want to give people money so that they can go and just benefit themselves. But I think philanthropy is at its best when people tell you who they are, you do something to vet it, to understand that they are who they say they are, and then you trust them to go do it. And I think the experiments about micro lending and some of the direct to person grants that have happened more recently in the innovation of philanthropy across the world, at the heart of it is just trusting people that if you give them money and allow them to identify their needs, that you'll see returns on it. And that kind of trust doesn't necessarily come easily in society. And I think we need to work to that space. Not when you think, oh, well, this person's just trying to get over on me and they're just going to take that money and go do something, but really trusting folks that because they care about their communities, because they care about their neighbors, because they care about their children, that you give them money, that they'll prioritize things that improve their community, and that by trusting them and giving to them, that you'll have an impact in a way that gets us going in the right direction.
So I'm certain that you guys probably do some sort of background check on these organizations and individuals, and that's probably time consuming. But Michelle and I want to go back, Rahsaan, when you mentioned that you started in March of 2020. I mean, that was right at the beginning of everything shutting down because of COVID. So there was nothing going on, no commerce, funds weren't flowing anywhere. People, couldn't buy food, or they were trying to stock up right before they were, know that they were going to be stuck in their homes for, a good amount of time. How did that affect your presence now, your new presence there? And, were you guys at that point just shutting down receiving all applications from individuals who were trying to get grants? And how was your finances, or how were your finances affected? I mean, did you stop receiving donations from people? I mean, did folks just say, hey, look, I need to hold on to all of my money, so I can't donate to your program anymore? So, I'd be fascinated to hear, how that affected you.
Ray, thank you for that question. This is the first time that I've been able to articulate what it was like to start from this lens. So I'm going to take it back. January of 2020 was when I got notification that I was going to become the next CEO of Citizens Committee for New York City. Extremely excited.
And the first Black CEO, Rahsaan.
Yes,
you got to mention that.
Yes, the first Black CEO. So my wife was very kind to me. She allowed me to take my mentee, who's kind of like my son, for a trip to Uruguay, where I was in the Peace Corps. We did a week in South America, fantastic. I come back in the month of February, Citizens Committee was having its annual gala. The annual gala is where they raise a lion's share, at least a third of their annual budget. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was a gala that raised $1.2 million. And my predecessor was up on the stage, and we got the money in the coffers, and they announced me as the incoming CEO of Citizens Committee. And I felt pretty good about the decision of coming on over. I'm at an organization that can have an over $1 million gala. We can raise the money. The list of folks who were donors was great. And so as long as I just basically did what they did in the past, I can be a steady state and then hopefully come in slowly with my new ideas and evolve. March 16th was my first day. And for those who were in New York City, they will know that was the first day that New York City public schools shut down. So my first day on the job, I am stuck in my townhouse with my wife who was working remotely and my daughter who can't go to school. And I'm trying to figure out how to manage my staff over Slack, over Zoom, over shared drives and the like. And as we all know now, it wasn't going to be a situation that lasts for a month. It was something that, still has ramifications for the way we are right now. So at that point, I'm telling the story in a long way, I had money in the bank because we had, over $1 million that came from the gala. We had applications that we had asked for in January that we had already kind of assessed. But then we're in the middle of this pandemic. The first thing that we did was we deployed a survey asking how the pandemic was affecting folks. And so we had applications from a population of folks, but then we had these survey results that overlap with some of those folks, but also introduces some others. And the people that were proposing to do a community garden or a community cleanup were now proposing trying to deliver food and goods or PPE and masks and sanitizers to their neighbors. And so what they had proposed in the first instance wasn't what they were planning to do in the current instance. And what we were able to do is we had vetted who they were for their first idea, but then allowed them to use the funding that we ended up giving them in April and May and June to take care of the current needs that were more basic life needs and not ones that were dependent on folks coming together in public or planting trees or doing things that you couldn't necessarily do during a pandemic. So we pivoted by using data. We pivoted by knowing who folks were in our population. We went completely remote. My office lease was up in March of 2021. Things still hadn't calmed down. It didn't make sense for us to have a lease in a space that wasn't going to be used. So we continued to operate completely remote up into right now, where I'm just considering doing a co-working space where we can have a more hybrid model. We showed up in community where we could, when folks had safe social distance days of actions and volunteerism, but we really leaned into Zoom meetings and having folks come together. We leaned into thought leadership and podcasts where we had folks show up and share their ideas. We really leaned into using social media to really be in a dialogue with folks who are our constituents. And that increased our engagement because a staff of 12 is not going to be in every town meeting in every borough at every moment, but you have ways to engage hundreds of New Yorkers, in some case thousands. That first survey that we sent out was filled out by over 1,000 New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs. That gave us a lot of great information of what was going on in the city. And so leaning into the data, leaning into these new tools to engage folks differently. And now that we can engage in person under certain circumstances, not losing what we learned through the innovation to make sure that we're mixing both approaches as we're doing our grant making.
Yeah, the whole the COVID experience really put a focus on mutual aid in communities, and so it seems like your Citizens Committee would be a great support for groups who are doing mutual aid. But we would be remiss if we didn't ask you to share a couple of examples of projects that, particularly, grassroots projects that started just by regular people having an idea and coming together to try to bring it into fruition. So can you give us a couple of examples of projects that you've funded and have done well?
There's so many that they all rush together, but I'll try to do a few that come to mind. So BK Level Up, which is in Brooklyn, for those who don't know that BK are initials, were these attorneys where they were community minded and they liked to advise folks on small business, assistance and helping folks to think about community issues that they can provide technical assistance to community members. Well, the pandemic hit, and yes, advising folks on community issues broadly still mattered, but they pivoted to make sure that they got community members access to vaccinations in a time where signing up for vaccinations was difficult, and making sure that across generations, and particularly older adults and seniors, had access to how to sign up and how to get access to the vaccinations. And then for the younger folks who might be more skeptical, and as you know, in Black communities, the Tuskegee experiment, and sometimes being cynical about, is this medicine to make me the guinea pig, or is this to make me better? To provide the ambassadorship to make sure that folks understood that, these are tools to keep people safer and to keep them together. So we were really proud of BK Level Up and what they've done to make sure that COVID didn't destroy their communities in that kind of way. And these folks who are lawyers and have access to other parts of their career, and they can do other things with their time, for making sure they're connected to community members. There is a new group that is SEQ Cleanup, and it was Southeast Queens Cleanup, that was started by Karen Lawson, also known by her DJ name, DJ Net. She was feeling depressed during the pandemic, and she also realized that it was not only her mental health, but her physical health was being kind of attacked and impacted. So she decided that she needed to get out and get into parks. And as she got into the parks and got moving, she noticed that the parks were under disrepair because, as you know, city services were shifted and there's pressure on budgets in different ways. So she started organizing these cleanup days, and those cleanups, and so Roy Wilkins Park in Southeast Queens is absolutely gorgeous and a great space. And it's almost feels like
that park is in Jamaica. As a matter of fact, I used to live near there. My wife and I used to live near there. I know that park very well.
So those who live in Manhattan know Central Park is like a Central Park out in Jamaica, Queens area. And they have done cleanups out there. But then, she's a DJ. She's also incorporated music and the arts and yoga. And so the moment of COVID and her trying to find a positive path out for herself motivated her to bring other folks along the journey for being physically fit, mentally fit, and engaging like their spirit and their souls with what they're doing. And just 3 weeks ago, New York One did a feature on them, and they invited me to come out to the park. And so I got to see the project up front, and they were a new grantee partner of ours that came out of the COVID moment. So we're really excited that folks that are in different boroughs get an opportunity to step up and be supported.
Nice.
Very cool. Very cool. So in the limited time we have left, Rahsaan, we wanted to ask, so you mentioned the impact the Southeast Asian community had with you, and then you mentioned people in Brooklyn with their group and Southeast Queens, but we're wondering, how do you manage the multiculturalism of New York City, the different communities that are looking for help, and how do you prioritize and track what you're giving to these various groups? And how do you guys, decide really who is worthy or what project is more worthy than another project.
Now you asked him to keep it short, and then you asked him a 10.
No, I like it. No, I'll try to. I'll try to do it. I try to hit it and quit it. Like James Brown.
He's a doctor. I know. I can't faith.
So, like Princeton, you attract a lot of great applicants. So, who's worthy is not the question. It's like, how do you get a portfolio of representative projects that can have an outsized impact by being beacons for the rest of the community and showing New York City what it can do. So yo hablo español también. So you need to be able to speak different languages and show up in different communities, know how folks need to be communicated to, and let them know that this is for them to get them to apply. And that way you can show the beautiful mosaic of New York City across culture, across gender, across sexual orientation and immigration status and like. And so you have to be intentional and also know your blind spot so that you can make sure that it happens. Folks think that philanthropy is for a gilded few, and I am committed to democratizing this, and that you just got to be able to show up.
So now we ask all of our guests as we wrap up, what's the takeaway that you want our listeners to leave with? Like if there's just one special thing that you want them to understand, what would that be?
For some reason, I'm thinking about Jadakiss. We gon' make it. We gon' make it. We gon' make it. And that energy is that we can do this. Don't wait for someone on the hills to come save you or give you permission. That if you come together with somebody else and you put your wheels in motion, that we can make wonderful things happen. Folks are waiting for the experts, waiting for folks with all the money, waiting for folks that speak more fancy than you do. Like, no, we can do this if we come together. And it's time to step up. Like everybody can do their part. Not everyone's going to be on a podcast. Not everybody's going to do speeches in front of full rooms, but like everybody has a part in making sure that we're going to be all right. There are a lot of challenges out there, but you got to believe in yourself and you got to bet on ourselves because we're going to make it.
You know that, Rahsaan, that is so important, and just perfect words to leave with them, because people often ask us in our conversations after they listen to a podcast or whatever, well, what can we do? Mm-hmm. Right. And we're often saying, well, what do you want to do?
Yeah. Sign up, show up, get some information. Don't say like literally to the instruction, go to this store, turn a knob. Like, don't be that lazy. If just show up and learn, have some kind of curiosity, there'll be a space. And don't be afraid.
Well, you mentioned that not everybody can be on a podcast, but we are fortunate to have had you on our podcast.
Thank you for finding it not robbery to invite me, and I appreciate it.
Listen, as always, our guests, we don't want to give Princeton too much light, but our Black Princetonians and our other Princetonians of color who have been brave enough to come on never cease to amaze us with just the quality of their thinking, their
always impressive
ability to be innovative, and their love for the people, right? And that's really what we're about.
The last thing I want to say, I'm just a Black boy from public school in Piscataway, New Jersey, with linkages to Harlem, linkages to the South, linkages to the transatlantic, slave trade. But like, I'm just like this humble kid that got an opportunity to come through this. So, I mean, I'm a miracle based off of what I've done. Like our ancestors couldn't imagine my existence. So I just got to do what I can to make it happen.
Oh, they imagined it, but they imagined it, but they had to wait a long time for us.
Yeah, their faith got us here. So,
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And who knows, if we get out of this crazy endemic, what's become an endemic now, maybe we'll have an opportunity to talk about other issues that
and catch up with you in the city, Rahsaan.
No, for sure. Or listen, Jersey side, New York City side, I will travel. So
with a mask, with a mask.
Right.
Absolutely, 1,000%.
Have-
Outdoors.
Right.
Great. great.
Have philanthropists will travel.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Well, Michelle, Dr. Harris was fabulous. You know, as we keep saying, we get more and more impressed by the guests on our podcast, and he didn't disappoint at all, not at all. Well, by the way, so for our listening audience, this is going to be our last episode before our August hiatus, right, Michelle?
Yep, that's right. We're taking a break.
We earned it.
So we hope all of you will tune in again in September when we come back. And if you've missed any of the episodes that we previously recorded, please
How dare you?
Yeah, please feel free to go ahead and listen to them. We've got some great 2 years worth of great content out there. So if you have missed anything or you don't remember what we did before, look back, because there's probably an episode that you should have listened to
Yep.
that you might enjoy now.
Yep.
If you enjoyed what you heard today, visit our website, NubianTigersPodcast.com. In addition to the podcast, we also post a resource page for each subject to provide additional sources of information. Follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @NubianTigers, written as one word. We're also on YouTube on the Nubian Tigers podcast channel. Our podcast is hosted by Anchor FM, but if you have a favorite podcast app, we're probably on it. Just look for Nubian Tigers Talk. Looking forward to sharing some knowledge with you next time.
Wake up, wake up, wake up.